One. And welcome everyone to another Smart Money Circle episode. I'm Adam Sarhan. With me today is Jay Jackson, who's the chairman and CEO at Abacus Global Management. Ticker symbol is ABL. Jay, thank you so much for taking the time and welcome to the Smart Money Circle.
Man, glad to be here. Thank you.
So, Jay, I always like to begin. Can you please tell us your story and how you got to where you are today?
Boy, it's I think everybody hears that and they want to go back to kindergarten, man. Maybe not quite that far, but I was born and raised up in the mountains up in California, way up in the Sierra Nevadas, and grew up in a type of beginning where, hard work was what you made of it. I always make the joke, it was as cold inside the house as it was outside, right? Like you had to get up, make a fire, do firewood, all those kinds of things. And those things make you resilient, right? A test of adversity early on in your life makes you kind of gives you this fortitude to push through things that you see later in life. I've made the joke often that says, without disrespecting anyone, but compared to where I started, this stuff is easy. I it so what brought me to Abacus is I actually launched my career at a great mutual fund company called Franklin Templeton. Was able to cut my teeth there and did a lot of different work there and really enjoyed it. And they were certainly at the peak of where they were in the mutual fund industry and have gone into alts and left there and ultimately worked for a few other shops. Worked at a family office. Was introduced to really looking for alternatives, specifically uncorrelated investments. And that's how I was first introduced to taking a look at life insurance policies as an asset. And, we were first looking at this as a potential investment asset. And as you look at it, an investment asset in its simplest format, owning life insurance as an asset, as an investor, you kind of treat it like a mortality driven zero coupon, right? It has a positive theta, it has a positive accretion rate. If you were to compare it against all investments out there, right? You say, hey, I want to go buy a piece of credit, right? That is going to pay me, low teens. That's cash backed by the issuer. It's A-rated issuer, uncorrelated to the market, and it creates in a positive way, regardless of what market conditions are. You probably back the truck up to get it, and that's the challenge because that is exactly what investors do. Where I am today is I'm the chairman and CEO of Abacus. We're one of the largest origination companies of those assets. So we originate, we're the market maker. We source these policies through education directly from the policyholders so that they understand that it's an asset. And then we're also the investor. And we then, put these assets on our balance sheet, put them in different types of tranches, and then resell them. So it's one of those unique scenarios in investments where both parties win. And
I,
when you have a win-win, it tends to lead to good things.
I love that. So you had the career, you started off and you worked your way up. You realize that there's a lot of value that can be added from the alternative investment space, specifically looking at areas that are overlooked by most investors. You found life
Yeah.
insurance as a good niche or a good area to invest in, and it provides favorable returns. It's not correlated to the stock market. And then you decided to look into Abacus. Tell us a little about what you do now, what the business does, some of your competitive advantages, and anywhere else you want to go with that, please.
Yeah, it's interesting how I got connected with Abacus. I was sourcing as an investor a good number of my policies from them, and they were a smaller firm. And I thought, gosh, this is a highly regulated industry. It's regulated in every state, and because of that, what it does is that it creates a pretty big moat. It's hard to access this industry, and so when I looked at this, I said, "Gosh, this is the right side of this business that I want to be out, that I want to be a part of, educate consumers." Because this is another startling statistic that people don't realize, but 19, no, excuse me, there's about $14 trillion of life insurance that's in force today. 14 trillion. That's 2.5 times US residential real estate market. Yet 90% of that nearly $14 trillion never pay a claim. And what happens is that people move past, they look at their life insurance and they're like, it's an expense. I don't really need this. I'm 80. My kids are in their 50s. I don't have a need for this contract. And so therefore, what do? They just stop making a payment on it. What we do is that we help them better understand their lifespan, better understand what the remaining duration of that contract might be. So you can kind of help solve for that. So, Abacus at its core is an alternative investment manager that happens to be the market maker and origination company for the asset that we ultimately manage. And that leads us down the road to lifespan data. And there's lots of fun directions we can talk about. I'm that guy at a party that kind of sits in the corner and people will come up to me like a carny and be like, hey man, how long I got? You put it in your magic ball. How long I got to live? What's my lifespan? What do you think you know? And I always kind of jokingly say, like you're good, right? Like based upon what you got, you can't improve or not prove at this point. So drink up, have a good time. Like it's really not going to have a big impact. It's far too late for you. But for the most part, it's a super fascinating business that's evolved from, hey, life insurance is an asset, education, to now applying lifespan data to financial services and other parts of people's lives. So Abacus is this really great company that began its roots originating and educating and grown into asset management and financial wealth management.
I love that. So thank you for that explanation, the overview. Your earnings have been growing steadily year over year. They're expected to continue to grow. Like you said, you've got that stable growth there. And I know that you plug into the institutional crowd. Individual investors can buy your stock, ABL or money managers, financial advisors, anywhere along those lines. Some of
Mm-hmm.
the what are some things that people don't know about your company that you'd like to share with investors from an investing standpoint?
Sure. I mean, and all those things you highlighted are spot on. I think one of the things that I think is super fascinating is the data we have. I mean, imagine having nearly 20 years of data that helps better understand when mortalities actually occur in the United States. It's super interesting. One of the things we don't do great at in the United States is identifying when and how a mortality occurs. An example is if someone has stage 4 cancer and unfortunately they pass away in an automobile accident, what does their death certificate say?
Car
Generally
accident.
automobile. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so, how can we really, give an example of how these things actually occur if you don't have great data going in? And a lot of it's self-reported. So what we started doing was taking that data and providing it to state pension funds, specifically around a couple areas. Most state pension funds, and you've heard a lot, this is kind of a hot topic in the current administration, where, hey, Social Security benefits are being paid to people who have already passed. There is truth to that. And I think that that's a known fact, regardless of political party or administration, that that's occurred. But why does it occur? One example is what I just laid out. You have bad data coming in, right? The other part of that data is that it's self reported. And so if you're receiving a Social Security check or a Medicaid or Medicare check, are you really motivated to say, hey, stop sending that check? Like I know I'm not accusing anyone of anything, but maybe not, maybe you notify them, but it's a few checks later. Like there's no pending rush here. And what we do is we actually find that data and we can tell the states within 48 hours with nearly a 95% accuracy when that mortality occurred. And now we're discovering how. So the next time we potentially have like a pandemic in the United States, that data could be really useful. And so, like when you look at Abacus as a company, we are a publicly traded company. We're an alternative asset manager. We have great spreads, great margins. But one of the things you may not realize is what we do with that technology, that longevity and lifespan technology, and how that's woven into the fabric of everything else that we do.
Wow, I love that. Thank you for that overview because that's really powerful. You can use the data and like most other people, A, they don't have it, but B,
Right.
they can't even leverage it. And I'm sure that ties into your other businesses too, with
Yeah.
respect to the insurance and all that. Is that correct?
Yeah, it certainly does, right? Like you start to look at some of these things, like honestly, like to pivot a little, you look at a company like 23andMe, why did they go bankrupt? Right? They have phenomenal data. So you can't just be a data company, right? You have to monetize it. And when we think about our data, we can monetize it in two ways, right? We can monetize it with state pension funds by providing them the data specifically related to the mortalities and when they incur within their population. That's a 3 and 5 year contract that's paid monthly, right? So it's had 23andMe been able to effectively capitalize on their data, they obviously wouldn't be bankrupt, right? People get that data and they go once, but then they could never do anything else with the data, right? How
Right.
could they monetize that 3 or 4 times down the road? That's what Abacus can do. So we monetize it there in the mortality verification. And then we look at the data and it applies to our other businesses. One of the biggest things that we're focused on is how do we apply lifespan data to retirement planning? And very
Mhm.
quickly, here's what I mean by that. What's the number one fear of every retiree in the United States?
Running out of money.
Of course, right? We've all heard it a million times. It's running out of money during retirement. Wouldn't it make sense that you would want to know how long you're going to be in retirement? Like know the denominator? We take that underwriting and apply that to someone who's about to go into underwriting to give them and their spouse a much better planning picture, right? How much money can they take out? Sometimes it's going to be much longer than they think, but oddly enough, it's going to be shorter in some cases, probabilistically. And so how do you do that planning? You have male versus female, right? Customized financial solutions designed around someone's actual remaining lifespan, I think is what's going to fundamentally change how financial services are delivered. I'll give you an example. Everyone has used target date funds at some point in their life, right? Like, oh, I picked 2035. What's the reasoning for 2035? I don't know, right? Like, but does it not make more sense that 2035 actually means something to you? That maybe, you have a 10-year lifespan and that's why you would pick that target date? I mean, there's hundreds of billions of dollars in these products, but it's missing the core foundational input to determine which product is right for you. And I think that's where scale is super exciting about how we can use this data. Why we're not just somebody who aggregates data and looks at it and says, gosh, I earned something on that one time. Now it's how do I continue to earn revenue in multiple different ways on that same data set?
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Thank you for that overview. So let's talk about risk. How do you handle risk, and what are some mistakes you see people make with respect to risk management?
Yeah, risk management, and I think it's related to how we view risk, right? Like, is it risk in investments? Is it risk management in relationship to our lives, right? Like, am I going to jump out of a helicopter? That's another form of risk management. So, like, there's a couple different things that you could kind of apply there, right? Um, but when we think about risk management at Abacus, for us, it kind of comes down to a couple things. You can mitigate risk by diversifying your investment, adding alts, having things that tend to be less correlated than other investments. When we think about our stock, we put out a press release about a month ago, shortly after Liberation Day was announced, and you saw a lot of volatility in the markets. And what we put out, which I thought was interesting, is that we're well positioned in this kind of volatile market. And I think that as investors, we're the kind of company you're looking for, right? Because if someone is going to consider seeking liquidity in their life insurance policy, it's during periods of uncertainty and turbulence and volatility. But on the same time, what drives investors to this kind of asset? The same things, right? Uncertainty, volatility. So we were in the unique position of being the origination company in an asset where there's additional interest related to policyholders, and secondly, from investors, right? Where investors were looking for other types of investments that were less correlated to the market. So, when we think about managing that risk, we think, and I think that that's the kind of ways that you want to manage that you want to be into an environment where, regardless of market conditions, you have some risk mitigations in place, whether that's through diversification or through opportunities to produce revenue regardless of market conditions. And that's kind of where we sit.
I love that. That's a really good point, because lots of people just look at risk as being linear, just one way of looking at it, but it's multifaceted and depends on how you're looking at it. So that's a great point. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's talk about timeless lessons, Jay, that you've learned along the way that you'd like to share with the audience. Business, life, anywhere you want to go.
Oh my goodness, there's so many, particularly coming from my upbringing, right? Like, one of the favorite things I grew up with was, and don't take this poorly from my father, but constantly it was, hey, nobody cares.
Yeah.
And that was a general statement that said, look, like, don't be a victim. You got to go out and make your own. You've got to go out and have fortitude. In the end, what I think he ultimately meant by nobody cares is that, it's on you, right? The core responsibility for success and for life and those kinds of things. If the trash needs to be taken out, take the trash out, right? Like, you can't just rely on someone else to do it. And if it doesn't get done, nobody cares, right? And I think that was kind of one of the tougher life lessons to hear when you're 7. But but right, like you drop a log on your foot and like, hey, nobody cares, suck it up, right? Like get on with it because you got to get the job and the task done. But that was something that I grew up with, that you had to always push through, right? Nobody else was going to come save me. I was alone in the mountains. And the other thing that we kind of, I think, is a culture point around our company is that growth and comfort are mutually exclusive. We
Wow.
know that if we're going to continue to grow at the rate that we're going to grow at, and that we have grown at over the last 20 years consistently, it's not comfortable. You can't just sit back and wait for it to happen, right? You have to get uncomfortable to grow to something that might provide comfort to somebody down the road. So, growth and comfort are mutually exclusive is a premise that we have around our company every day, um, and nobody cares. It's just what I
I
grew up with. Like, I hope people care about this podcast, but I think they'll all get it. I think they'll be
yeah.
like, yeah, right. Nobody really, nobody cares. Like, you just got to go out and do your thing.
No, I think what you're saying is absolutely brilliant, by the way. And I have a long-standing joke as well, if you call it a joke, but
Yeah.
there's really a lot of truth to it that nobody cares. So I just
Yeah.
closed a big business deal. I go to my wife and kids, yeah, what are we eating for dinner tonight? So,
Yeah.
it's
Right.
not to say they don't care. I don't mean it in a bad way, but at the same
Right.
time, it's, what's top of mind. And if it's not
Yeah.
top of mind for that person, it might be top of mind for someone else, but that
Yeah.
nobody cares, I think is absolutely brilliant, by the way. So, I mean,
Well,
yeah,
yeah,
hats
it's
off.
pretty simple, but it seems to, yeah, it's a reminder for myself not to feel sorry for myself or get caught in a moment. Like, calm is contagious, and regardless of the surroundings, you just push through, do your day to day, and don't get caught up in it.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. Okay, next point. Let's talk about the flip side of that. What are some timeless mistakes you've learned along the way that you'd like to share with the audience? Either you've made them or how do you learn from
Yeah.
them? Any way you want to go.
Yeah, I would say that don't rush, and time is really time, because time is already fast, and that's what I mean by don't rush. Like, it's fine. We've all heard all the different sayings about rushing and being patient and doing those things. Like, I'm not saying that as though, hey, don't rush and don't be successful and don't have a lot of growth. But I think a lot of the mistakes that I've made, even over the last 20 years of my career was around I think the idea of um, gratitude and appreciation and accountability for the time I wasted,
Yeah.
and wasted on things that probably didn't matter. Right. And I can give you some really direct impacts on that. Many times I speak to individuals that are towards the latter part of their life. And it's really interesting when you're talking to somebody who's in their early 80s or even mid 80s, and they're talking about their life in retrospect. And we tell them things like, hey, probabilistically, this is where your lifespan probably looks over the next like 3 or 5 years, and kind of how that goes. And it can feel like a clinical conversation, or it's a very terrifying conversation for people who are younger. They're like, oh, I can't have that conversation with my mom and dad. Try it, because they will talk to you about it.
Right.
But I think, in the end, as I was trying to always rush to the next event, which was a huge mistake, I should have listened more to the advice I wish I had early on from them, which was very simple. Treat every moment with purpose, be super present, and do the opposite. Slow time down. How do you slow time down? And the best way to slow time down is to be super present in that moment. Because when I'm talking to somebody with a 2 year lifespan or even shorter, they'll say things to me like, hug your kids, call your mom and dad if they're still alive, reconnect with your siblings, do the things that actually truly matter. Because no one's going to sit on their deathbed and say, oh man, I wish I had, taken that one extra meeting. They're going to be like, hey, I wish I had gone to that event. I wish I had, experienced X, right? Jumped out of that helicopter, whatever it may be. And so the way that you can focus on that is to be super present and acknowledge how valuable your time is.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. That is another brilliant comment because what you're doing is you're hyper focusing on the now, and then by
Mm-hmm.
doing that, quieting the mind and or you're slowing down time because it's right now, and then it's
Right.
right now. Yesterday doesn't matter. Tomorrow, you're right now. So if you do that
Yeah.
all day, present, it's really, really powerful. So thank you for that. Let's talk about leadership. What makes a great leader, and what are some lessons you've learned along the way about leadership that you'd like to share with the audience?
Sure. I think for me, what makes a great leader is, and I know it feels a little cliche, but it's true, is humility. Um, and humility in yourself, most importantly, right? Like, never read your print kind of thing. Um, and, because as you continue to grow, you become like in my role where you have hundreds of employees and, you get to a point where you can be a little bit suspicious, right? Are people just being nice to me because of the position, or are they being respectful and kind because they actually respect what I do, right? And so I think that the best way to remain, I think, very successful as a leader is remaining humble first, right? Looking at yourself internally, asking yourself the tough questions of, what don't I know, and how do I learn that? I don't know everything, and I better do a great job of trying to surround myself with people who know a lot more than I do. And I think that early on in my career, even as I became CEO 7 years ago, as I was really refining that skill set, everything had to be done right now. And if somebody else couldn't do it, I didn't think they could do it, I took it on myself. Right. And it was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it. And inevitably that takes you to a place to where no one else can do what you do. And therefore, right, like you can't grow your business. And to successfully grow your business and become an actual company or a corporation, you have to find, hire, train, impart all that wisdom on the people around you, and trust that they'll do it. And then be humble enough to admit that they can do it better than you.
That is really, really powerful. And that's tough for lots of people because the ego comes into play, right? So having
Sure.
that powerful, yeah.
Oh, it's still hard for me, right? Like I still, we get investor relations inquiries and I'm like, not quick enough. And I respond. And someone will be like, why are you responding? Wait, this can't be right. Like you are responding to this investor inquiry. I'm like, oh, I just thought. So it's still always a daily learning. But I spend, you know, all night, most of the day focused on how do I get better? How do I learn more? How do I listen better?
It's the whole point of the show is timeless advice. So I love that learning.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. So, okay, next question for you. Let's talk about adversity. How do you handle adversity and what are some obstacles you had to overcome along the way?
Adversity is interesting because everyone looks at adversity differently. No one would be listening to you or have the success that they have if they didn't face adversity. And you don't have to live in a, one bedroom cabin in the mountains to have what I call like forced adversity early on in your life, right? We all face it. We've all faced challenges. We've all faced challengers and these kinds of things. And you have to hold your head up and actually have the fortitude to push through. And wherever that may have happened in your life, I think it's certainly applicable, and you shouldn't ever discount it or throw it away. Sometimes we face adversity, we want to just move past it as quick as we can. One of the things I like to do is reflect back on it. So if I'm faced with adversity, I'm faced with challenges, things that didn't go my way, that's where I tend to spend the most time in reflection. And don't get me wrong, you want to reflect on your wins and make sure that, hey, this is what happened. But it truly is an opportunity to learn. And I know, again, we hear that often, but if you really get to the core of it and break down what that adversity looks like inside, you start to identify mistakes. And that goes back to the humility part, going, oh, well, what if I had gone this way or that way, right? That might have changed this. Or one of the things I started doing was building multiple plans. So even though we have the same end goal, I might have two paths to get there. And what I choose to do is actually go down both paths, which is twice the work, twice the cost. But what it does do is ensure results. And the way I know that I should be doing that in some circumstances is because I faced a ton of adversity and I fell flat on my face and I didn't have an option B. Now, in that same scenario, I have an option B, and we just jump on that track and away we go and never miss a beat and make it seem like that was our plan the entire time. So I think, when you're planning and working through adversity, one, self acknowledgement is super critical. And spending time acknowledging where things went right, why you had the adversity, and what were some of the techniques you personally used to get through it in that circumstance. because, I kind of call it my cookie jar of adversity. And when I'm facing challenges, I dip back into it. And I'm like, hey, man, I've kind of been through something similar here. And that's why I said at the very beginning, like, look, in the grand scheme of things, nothing's going to get harder than what it was when I was growing up. So I can dig into that. But anybody else who faces adversity, they should be able to recycle that, dig into it, get into that uncomfort and be like, hey, look, like I'm all right. Like I've gone through this before.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And then what, I guess, final question for you, Jay, is what is the best piece of advice you'd like to give the audience or your 30-year-old self?
My 30-year-old self, I'd be like, hey man, don't worry, you're gonna have your hair at 53. That's what I'd say. Like you're not gonna worry about all those things, dude. No. Hey, um, yeah, I for sure the absolute best advice I'd give to my 30-year-old self outside of the reassurance, stay who you are, right? Don't change, don't follow trends. But most importantly, if I could think of an overlying topic of everything we've covered today, slow time down, man. Like there's no rush in that sense, right? Like don't quit sprinting to the next thing in your life. Walk to it and then appreciate all the lessons you got along the way. Because we have a saying here is know the value of your life.
Mhm.
And knowing the value of your life is the most important asset that you can possibly have, right? The value of your life, if you think about it, is time. I'm a big watch fan. And I tell people, like, you're like, why do you invest in watches? It seems like a silly investment. I'm like, one, they do okay. But two, it's a constant reminder of placing value on something that is incredibly valuable. And that is time.
Wow.
And that would be the advice I would give to everyone, particularly somebody who recognizes that it's limited.
Absolutely love it. Well, Jay, this has been fantastic. Ticker symbol is
Likewise.
ABL. Congrats on all the success, and hopefully we'll have you on again soon.
Love to. Thank you, Adam. We'll see you.